Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad Tehami. Within a few hours from now, President-elect Donald Trump is going to be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States of America, and he has promised a blizzard of executive orders on his first day in the office, saying, let me quote, "Within hours of taking office, I will sign dozens of executive orders, close to 100 to be exact, many of which I'll be describing in my address tomorrow. With the stroke of pen, I will revoke dozens of destructive and radical executive orders and actions of the Biden administration," unquote. Also, likewise, Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller, in a briefing with the lawmakers, confirmed the elements of the immigration actions, declaration of the national emergency related to energy, also the pardon for the January 6, 2021 convicts, and a number of other executive orders. Now, the inauguration ceremony has been set indoors because of the poor weather conditions, where a number of world leaders are also likely to be in attendance. We'll be talking about the significance of that particular thing, also how this particular inauguration ceremony is going to be different from the previous ones. Also, it is expected that the theme of the inaugural speech by Donald Trump is going to be unity, strength, and fairness. Let me quickly bring in our esteemed panel of guests to talk about this important topic. For that, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Mr. Jauhar Saleem, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, currently serving as the President of Institute of Regional Studies in Islamabad. Ambassador Saleem, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Dr. NoumanSattar, American political analyst. Dr. Sattar, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by another participant. As they join in, I'll be introducing them. Ambassador Saleem, now President Donald Trump talks of 100 executive orders on the day one when he sits in the White House just after in his inauguration. Isn't it unprecedented? 100 executive orders on day one. What does that signify? What importance should we understand from this?
Yeah, that sets the tone for his presidency in some ways, I would say. But in general, this is a watershed moment in the US political history. And Trump's 47th presidency is going to be different than the 45th presidency. Then it was a surprise when he had lost the popular vote, but won because of the Electoral College. A presidency he was not ready for, he was not expecting. But this time around, it's very different. Trump, first of all, Republicans have a majority in the House, majority in the Senate, majority in the US Supreme Court, in the sense that by 7-3, they have the Republican-nominated judges in the Supreme Court. Then again, this time around, the strongest comeback in the US political history. He's won the popular vote as well this time, millions of votes more than Kamala Harris. So this, and then, given the fact that he has had the experience of being the president for 4 years, and then being in the wilderness for another 4 years, I think that has really made him a stronger person, even more domineering than before, perhaps slightly less mercurial, slightly less unpredictable, although these would be still the hallmark of his presidential style. Now this coming with a bang, with those 100 presidential executive orders, this was quite expected, because in the US presidential system they get a couple of months after winning the elections. So during all that time, they can set the tone in terms of the first 100 days, the actions that they wanted. And many US presidents do that. On the day one, they take some major actions. In terms of Biden presidency, the day one they resigned a lot of executive orders that had been issued by the Trump's earlier presidents. Now, in terms of these 100 executive orders, what are they going to relate to? Number one is going to immigration, because that was one of the key areas where he was able to convince the Americans that he was going to do a much better job than what had been done by the Biden administration. And there have been certain weaknesses there. During the Biden administration's time, we witnessed, or the US witnessed, millions of immigrants coming from Mexico and all over South America. And the numbers were much larger than what they've had before that. They do get millions over the years, but this was a much larger number. And then the cities were literally like many of the cities were clogged by all these people coming and becoming homeless, and then the city governments trying to sometimes put them in hotels and sort of, it created quite a chaotic situation in many cities. So he's going to change that in two ways. Number one, strengthening the border. He'll use the National Emergency Acts to bolster, to use the defense budget to bolster the strength there, the numbers there, in terms of the the border guarding. Then he had said that he'll build the wall. Of course, is probably going to act on that. The second thing is
that particular policy sorry for the interjection, that has been popularly known as the Remain in Mexico policy. The National Border Protection, Migrant Border Protection.
That was an act that they had basically, like, in his previous presidency.
So is it more of specific to Mexico only?
Well,
when we talk of enhancing the border security.
Yeah, because you see, even all the South American illegal immigrants, and not just the South Americans, even a lot of Indians, from other countries, what they do is they go to Mexico first, and from there they try to cross the US border. And that has been happening for decades, but it only increased, now to an extent where it was being much more noticeable.
Do we understand that Canada comes under this particular definition of this specific enhancement of the border security as well?
I think they will do something in a different way. They'll probably not put guards there on the border as many, but what they plan to do is they are going to push Canadians, and they threaten. Trump has threatened them that, okay, if you don't do that, then I'm going to raise the tariffs on Canadian exports to the US. So they are going to do it through the tariffs, But that is one thing. Other than the immigration, you see the other, tariffs. He always says the tariffs is for me, it's the most beautiful word in English. And he plans to increase tariffs all across the world, and that might affect Pakistan as well, depending how he does that. And he's going to again use certain legislations they have, which are basically emergency in nature or in terms of national security. And those legislations, the power because of those legislations, he can use and as executive orders. Then the third area is, he said he will reform the government, and they are, for example, they're going to take the security away for the federal employees of the US government. Something that he's tried to do earlier in his last tenure, but then Biden, when he came, he resigned that. So that is in terms of his domestic policies, but in terms of foreign policy as well, I think he's going to have a great impact in terms of changing the US foreign policy intonation. And why do I say that? In his last term, when he was not as strong a president, what did he actually do? Multiple things. For instance, he withdrew from UNESCO, he withdrew from UNHCR, he withdrew from Paris Accord, he withdrew from this Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, he withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. He just changed the contours of policy in many, many ways. And this time what he plans to do is probably bigger than that. And one more thing which is important is the type of people he's chosen for his cabinet this time. Last time he was a bit restrained. He brought in some retired generals and people with a great deal of experience, and and who tried to then sort of in some ways rein him in. But this time he's choosing people like Marco Rubio. He's choosing sort of he's choosing many hard-wing journalists. But he's chosen some of the people within his own family. So this time around, he's not playing very cautious there. He wants his team with his imprint, and of course people like Elon Musk and Ramaswamy. So basically this time we will see a much stronger Trump, who would sort of who would not be as restrained as the last time, and who wants to probably leave a legacy as well. And before that, he wants to show the Americans that he is going to do what he meant when he says, okay, making America great again, MAGA, so to speak, and America First policy, whereby in all world affairs, he will not sort of, he'll not be bounded by, those very long-standing US foreign policy principles or sort of, ideals or values or whatever they sort of used to profess, but rather just by sheer interests of the US and in many ways his own personal interests as well. So I think this is going to create quite ruckus internationally. Again, it did the last time as well, not just for countries like China and countries around the US, but also in terms of America's Euro-Atlantic partners. You know, because last time you said, okay, if you don't pay, then, you know, like...
I'll come to this particular point. Ambassador Saleem, a very comprehensive overview of what exactly is expected from the Trump administration, the Trump 2.0. And you're of the view, of course, he's going to be stronger this time around as compared to his first tenure. Dr. Sattar, when we talk about these 100 executive orders, if I remember correctly, last time during his entire tenure, he signed 220 executive orders during the entire tenure of 4 years. Now, in comparison to that, 100 on the day one, what could be expected for the next 4 years? And is this unprecedented in the US history?
I would say it's unprecedented, but then as Ambassador Saab was just saying that we know what's coming. He has already announced his basic policies. For example, his executive orders, like on his first day, in the first 100 days. So we are going to see more of that. And as we have just been like talking or discussing, this time Trump is very clear on what he wants to do. In the first time, as we say, he was not really very sure, very clear. But this time, I think he is well prepared for sitting in the White House and things that are expected of him, like on his populist appeal, on what made him win. And of course, we have to also need to compare the Biden presidency, Biden's four years in office. And in a way, he would like to rectify all that in his view was wrong. And
is it going to be a tit-for-tat measure? Because as Ambassador Saleem has also mentioned that on day one, there were a lot of executive orders. They were rescinded by the Biden administration on day one also. So is it going to be a tit-for-tat measure?
He's a kind of person
just to settle the scores?
Right.
Or is it going to be more than that? Is it going to be more than the larger national interest? Or in the pursuance of that Make America Great Again?
I think all three together. Of course, he has been saying he wants America strong and greater and all that. And then I think looking at his personality, how he reacts to something, because he's already been talking like against what Biden has been doing. And of course, he would like to show that he means what he says. And of course, one way to do it is to issue these executive orders, like what he has talked about, tariffs on Canada and like Mexico, and he says he is going to do on day one. So there are many other things that he is very sure that he is going to do, and of course we know that he is going to do. So in a way, yes, it's more of a reaction to Biden presidency, maybe also a reaction that he did not win a second term, second consecutive term. So it's all also a reaction to that. So at least we are clear, people who have been watching him.
Is that particular reaction, if that is the case, is it going to be limited only to those executive orders? Or would he want his political enemies to go into the jail as well? Because as per one of his statements, he said that he doesn't want the Justice Department to go against those people, but many of them belong in jail.
Well, I think that was symbolic as well. That was also a message as well. Probably he's not going to be like too fast on that, but I think he might. But I think he might. And of course, because I think he's looking at the like big picture, legal issues, political issues, economic issues, for example, trade issues. He's looking at everything. And of course, earlier we would not see these things come up like so quickly. But I think even before he enters the White House, it's like all very clear. Like it's like you can say his wish list. He would like to do all these things. So it's very clear even before he is sitting in the White House. Sorry, the Oval Office.
Right, Mr. Ambassador Saleem, you already talked of the majority in the House of Representatives as well as in the Senate. You also talked about a very interesting thing, majority in terms of the strength of judges over there in the Supreme Court also. So when we talk about these executive orders, I just want to shed a little bit of light regarding as to the force they do carry with themselves. Are there any sort of legal challenges on the way as well, especially when we talk about, you already mentioned that he's stronger this time around, got the majority in both House and the Senate as well. We've got in terms of the judges in the Supreme Court also. So are there any likely challenges expected on his way, or these executive orders are going to have a smooth sailing by far and large?
No, there'll be a lot of legal challenges. As we speak, the legal challenges are already being prepared because people have an idea of what the executive orders are going to be. And I've read media reports whereby, there are certain quotas who are already preparing sort of, the legal action against those. And sometimes because these, I mean, you could have a legal action even against a bill, and sort of, eventually sometimes, the U.S. Supreme Court has, at times, they've shot down certain bills as well. But executive orders are even more vulnerable in that way. Generally, they have the force of some statute, and then based on that. But still, they can only be always be legally challenged. Now, one example which comes to my mind right now is, and that was one of the major policy steps taken by President Biden, which was that he wanted to waive the student loans. And that meant like literally tens of billions of dollars, and that would have affected millions of students, in the U.S. And it was eventually shot down by the Supreme Court, although that was a bill, And so the point is that, because the American system is based on that, it's called the separation of powers and checks and balances. So whatever, the executive does, the judiciary can have, and the term judicial review started from there. So that is there. But having said that, I'm sure that they would have done their homework as well on the Trump side, the Republicans. And let's say even if there's a legal challenge, you can safely assume that 90% or more of those executive orders would stay intact. And this is a usual thing by the many US presidents, that they use the power of executive orders to run their policy, especially in times when they don't have a majority in the Congress, in both the houses of Congress. So it's nothing surprising. But in terms...
So well, this is a very important point. When they don't have the majority in the Congress, right? So this time they've got the majority in both the houses as well. So was there any need of bringing in so many executive orders despite having such a majority in both the houses already?
Oh, definitely, yes. The need comes from the fact that if you have to act quickly, an executive order can be issued in a day, To pass a bill in the US, like it takes a long time. There are lots of negotiations, and even if your party is in majority, even then, to have, for example, to have the type of legislation these 100 executive orders carry, you would probably need more than a year or so, perhaps even more. So executive orders are very important. They're quick, and they're very precise as well. Because when you pass laws, sometimes the laws can affect sort of more than what is intended. So definitely, it's a very important instrument. But I think what is more important is, it's not just the executive orders. President has, because like he's the head of executive, just through his orders, he can set the tones for a lot many policies, domestically, internationally. Because what if, for instance, State Department, Department of Defense, all these different departments, which we in Pakistan call the ministries, they give their input to the president as to what you should do in terms of relations with this country or that, or let's say in terms of this Palestine issue, Gaza issue right now, or Ukraine. But eventually it is the president who decides. And for that, most of the time, he doesn't really need any executive orders. He just issues decisions. This is what we do. So American president is, can be very powerful, and especially in this situation where, like I said, he has all the other majority in all the other institutions as well. This is going to be a very powerful presidency. I think Trump will have a great leeway in shaping the contours of the U.S. History for the coming 4 years, and not just in terms of running the government, but also in terms of, and that is very important. It's not just right now in the US, it's not just about the governmental policies. It's a cultural war there right now. There's a lot of polarization in the US, they're between the so-called liberals or the moderates and the conservatives and the right-wingers. And Trump's victory, this presidency, is in many ways is going to shape the contours of that cultural conflict, within the US in the coming years. For the time being, it is the conservatives and the right wing which is going to be ascendant for the next several years. And that makes a lot of difference, not just for the daily lives of the US citizens in so many different ways, but it could also send a message across the world. For instance, Trump took a stand against Trudeau, for instance, the Prime Minister, previous Prime Minister in Canada. He was one of the guys who said he should resign. Eventually he resigned, not exactly because of what Trump said, but that pressure was also there, that did build the pressure. And Elon Musk is already making a lot of statements about the government in the UK and other countries as well. So I think this side of the sort of Republican ascendancy is also going to play out very important role in the coming years.
There are a number of other aspects regarding the significance of this particular inauguration of the 47th President of the United States of America. There's one very important aspect. I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Dr. Sattar into the discussion also. Dr. Sattar, do you think are there going to be any sort of challenges for these executive orders on the way ahead? And do you expect more challenges coming from the Supreme Court, or despite there is a majority of the judges that have the inclination towards?
I think many of these are going to be challenged. And for one thing, I think the Supreme Court, though with a, you can say, conservative, you can say imbalance, it won't really like to be associated with Mr. Trump's policies, like given his background and given his the first term. So there are going to be challenges from the public, from people who are affected, because I would assume many of these, if they are really politically motivated, then in a culture like the US, people are like very forthright about their laws, about their rights. So I think there are going to be challenges, and of course the Supreme Court, the judges, of course, they have to take a legal stand. For example, it could be on immigration, it could be on the cases against writers at Capitol Hill. So he's going to look at all these things. But I'm sure, I'm not sure how fair, because he thinks he's going to be fair, but we don't really know how fair he's going to be, especially when he announced that he's going to rectify the wrongs and all that. So I see lots of challenges, both political as well as legal, coming from many directions.
Right. So this particular inauguration, do you see any difference in this particular inauguration for the President of the United States of America as compared to the previous ones? And what usually happens to be the tradition, the usual pattern? I've read at many places that it usually happens to be a domestic affair. This time, many of the world leaders have been invited, and there is a pattern to who has been invited and who has not been.
So mostly the big change is that this time generally it's outdoors, and it's mostly an American affair. But this time, due to the weather conditions, is going to be indoors, and I don't think there is such a huge space inside the Rotunda that they can accommodate. But still, I'm sure Trump has his own way of dealing with things and arranging things or managing things. And I think it was his idea. It would be his idea.
Of course, the weather conditions are out of control. I mean, it had naturally to be set inside, indoors. So in that sort of way, there must be logistical limitation, right? What about it going or transforming from being a domestic affair towards more of an international affair? Because many of the world leaders, with a certain inclination, they've been invited.
That's what I meant. That it is Trump's idea to have those people there, to be with him, to have their support at this time, because it's a very important day, important moment for him, not just for the US, for Trump personally as well. So I think it's his idea to have more people from outside, foreign dignitaries, people who he would like there to be part of his inauguration, just as I say, to be part of history with him.
Okay, so what's the significance of invitation to the Chinese president? Of course, he's not going to attend, the vice president is going to attend. What's the significance of that in particular?
See, Trump has a very interesting, enigmatic personality. It's not that he's anti-China, he would be anti-China. He, of course, has been involved in tariff wars and all that. But then he still likes to reach out. He reached out to the North Korean president. So he has this tendency to reach out to his, I would say, adversaries as well. So it was, I think, more of a symbolic gesture, and probably he didn't expect President Xi to be there, but then I think it was good gesture from the part of
Reaching out to adversaries, what about the European Commission head Ursula von der Leyen and much of the European Union members of the NATO? They've been ignored. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been ignored also. The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hasn't been invited. What about them?
Well, we have had this thing from Trump vis-a-vis the Europeans. Of course, he has, I would say, if I could use the word grudge, and that comes from his first term. So it's very obvious. So he will make his choice. He will make his pick, who he wants and who he doesn't want. It's not that like they're his adversaries, but then he has reasons for them not to be there. Like he is that, because we have to really understand his personality, how he sees things, how he sees friends, how he sees adversaries, and who he wants and who he doesn't want.
Right, Ambassador Saleem, the tendency of reaching out to adversaries, like North Korean Kim Jong-un, and then also this invitation to President Xi Jinping of China. Of course, he's not going to attend, but his vice president is going to. Firstly, the significance of that. Also, your analysis regarding this particular inauguration being different in comparison to the previous ones. And what about these, the UK Prime Minister, German Chancellor Ursula von der Leyen also, and the members of NATO, they're not being, they weren't invited.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, first of all, we have to remember that Trump is known to love grandstanding, you know, so he wants to, like, he wanted this event to be like an emperor's coronation, you know, so he's inviting people, you know, leaders all around the world, and especially the leaders who he thinks are, like, you know, in some way equal to him.
An emperor's coronation, but the weather happened to be a stumbling block in that, because had been it outdoors, it had more of a significance.
Exactly.
Am I correct on that?
I mean, so that you can't control the weather, you have the limit to your power. So, and in terms of his style, what we have seen before as well, he values power, you know. So he always sees the leader, you know, the powerful leaders, he respects them more, like somebody like Putin, for instance, even Xi, President Xi, you know, although, you know, we know the type of relations. Putin, somehow Trump always seemed to have a soft corner for. But President Xi, he's made this gesture, and President Xi, of course, you know, from that side, perhaps rightly so, because, you know, the Chinese leader would not like to give the impression as if sort of, you know, like, I mean, you know, because China sees itself as an equal to the US. So basically, and the US would not come to the, let's say, if it was a Chinese sort of, you know, a similar event. So that was there, and we expected that President Xi would send somebody, you know, and he's sending a vice president, of course. Okay, there are two things here. One, Trump wanted this grandstanding, and so he invited world leaders, but then he invited world leaders that he thinks are important enough. You know, the Europeans, he's always shown not really a disdain for the European leaders, but he sees many European countries as free riders, and he has expressed it openly that Europe is a free, you know, they are free riding on American largesse. They don't pay for their defense, you know, in trade as well. They're taking advantages. You know, these are things on record that he's been saying. He did not enjoy a good relations with Chancellor Merkel, who was known as a world leader. Used to be ambassador there in Germany in those days, and sort of, you know, and other European leaders as well. There were very few European leaders that he enjoyed good relations with in his first term. And, you know, most of these leaders were like a slightly more autocratic type of leaders. You know, that's what kind of the right wingers that he liked. So that is there. This time as well, I think the Euro-Atlantic alliance would be one of the areas where people would be very worried right now, you know, although many of those countries, he was insisting that they increase the defense spending to 3%, and many of those countries have done that already. You know, in the last term, you know, he was focusing on that very much. But the other issues, not trade. He wants them to pay for the U.S. forces stationed there, and, you know, like, and things like that, because he wants, you see, he's a businessman, and a very shrewd businessman at that, and he is a deal maker. So in terms of his deal making abilities, he looks at the conflicts, and he sees as to what, you know, where he can make a deal and show his kind of his worth to the American people and to the world. And in terms of his allies, he tries to, at least he wants to see a situation where the US is getting the best part of the deal. You know, he doesn't like situations where he feels that in any way they're free riding, you know, and that was the impression that he had in his first term. There's also a very interesting sort of, you know, element to that, and some people have mused about that, and that is that, you know, Trump's grandfather was a German. Actually, the last name was Drumpf, which was, you know, which changed to Trump when they came, and he was expelled from Germany, you know. So some analysts even had mused during his first presidency that perhaps, you know, there was the family, because of being expelled from Germany, they had some sort of, you know, they had a grouse because of that as well. But personally, I don't really think, you know, it could be that much. I think it's his style in terms of respecting power, its style in terms of, you know, and that is why, because he respects power, so he respects the adversaries more than the allies, because allies he sees as some sort of a henchman, you know. And this inauguration, he wanted to, first of all, show to the world that, you know, that he is back in power, and that, and what he terms as the strongest comeback in the political history of the world. That's what he calls that. So he wanted to emphasize that. But like you said, because of weather, it's probably not going to happen the way you wanted.
You already said that he is a businessman, a shrewd businessman, as per your words, very good at deal making. Okay, so. And you already also mentioned that whatever he says that seems to be happening, for instance, the resignation of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, right? Yeah. We also saw that ceasefire deal happening in Gaza, and he had threatened that before his inauguration, by the time he takes office, the captives must be released, and we have seen that deal happening also. Okay, so. Exactly. Given that particular pattern, when he talks of making Canada the 51st US state, also taking over Greenland, and also making the Panama Canal under US control. So do we see those things happening on the ground also?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because, you know, his style of diplomacy, he comes out very aggressively, very strongly, and tries to intimidate the opponents or the parties involved, and it works as well sometimes because of the fact that because he represents this great mighty US, so to speak. I had said in previous programs, including yours here, that now this ceasefire would happen, you know, with the Trump inauguration, not before that, and it happened, you know, like just a night before, and allowing Trump to take full credit. I had no doubt in my mind that it will coincide with that. But similarly, what we saw and what we are going to see in Ukraine, we will see now sort of, you know, like developments taking place quickly. We will see an accelerated process to some sort of an, you know, an eventual sort of, you know, peace deal, you know, because I think he has a clear vision of that in his mind, and he has the power as well. And for the first 6 months or perhaps even a year of his presidency, I think Trump would have a great power, and that power not only stems from the things that I've mentioned, but also stems from the fact that you know, right now he seems to be very willing to use all this power. With time, gradually, you know, then the power erodes, you know, because then people see the limits of your power, and also, you know, and then because more challenges happen, and also your popularity could drop because of certain reasons and everything, and also, you know, like the intimidation can only work up to a level. But Trump is not a strategic thinker, you know, but he's a great tactician. There's no doubt about that, you know. Tactically, he's brilliant. Okay, you know? So he's a great marketeer, and he's a great deal maker in many ways.
So what about using that particular power when it comes to that very promise that he'd been making throughout his election campaign, one of the largest deportation drives in the US history? I'll come back to you for your detailed view regarding that. Dr. Sattar, when we talk about the deal making, and he had also threatened right after his election victory on a number of occasions, he had said that all hell will break out if the captives held in Gaza are not released by the time he is inaugurated as the President of the United States of America again. And that is what we saw happening just a few days back, that ceasefire deal happening in Gaza between Israelis and the Palestinian resistance group Hamas. So should we understand that the credit of this particular deal solely and exclusively goes towards that particular repeated threat of Donald Trump, or was there anything on the part of Biden's administration's diplomacy that had to do with that particular deal as well?
I think a combination of both, because we have seen that this deal making has been going on for a couple of months, and many, of course, Middle Eastern countries, Muslim countries had been part of that, and they had been pushing for that. But of course, of course, it was not going to be an easy deal, and I think Biden administration, I would say, was really keen to have that deal much earlier, but of course, with Hamas and of course Israel, the way things were going on, it was not possible. So I would give Trump only partial credit. Of course, he supported the deal, of course, for Israel's sake. But I think the Biden administration on its own made a lot of effort along with Qatar and Egypt, and they've been working very hard on it. So I would give Trump the credit only goes to the extent that he supported the deal because he wanted an end to this war, return of the hostages, before he took oath of office. And of course that happened, but partial credit to him, most to the Biden administration, because they really worked hard on that.
Right, Dr. Sattar, when he talks of Canada being made as the 51st state of the US, taking over under control of the US, the Panama Canal, and also Greenland. What sense do you make of that particular statement?
Well, as someone who studies IR and maybe political science, I won't take him very seriously. Knowing him, I won't take it very seriously, because Trudeau resigning under internal pressure is something else. But Greenland and Canada, like huge countries, and you sort of lay claim to that and try to push for that, I won't take it seriously. It just bluster, I would say.
I mean, Greenland specifically, there has been twice an effort already in the past in the US history that various administrations have tried to take over Greenland also. One happened in the 1800s and the other one happened under Henry S. Truman, if I'm getting that correctly. Henry S. Truman hinting at getting Greenland for $100 million US. So that shows that Greenland has got some sort of strategic significance for the US. Perhaps that thing has popped up when President Trump talks about it with some really strategic significance at the back of mind.
Of course, it has strategic significance for Europeans, for European security, but I don't think so in the current situation, like in the 21st century. Taking over such a huge area, I'm sure is going to really affect European security and Europeans' concerns about American role, let's say about American hegemony and American designs on Europe. So I think it gives a very wrong message and carries a very unpleasant message for the Europeans. And I don't think, looking at European politics at this time, that there could be any sort of a understanding in the US or acquiescing to US control or something and I would say the same for Panama, and of course the same for Canada. It's much bigger. It's much bigger, and of course it's like part of the Commonwealth and all that. So as I said, I won't take all these three seriously.
So when specifically talking about Greenland, do you think it could be a pressure tactic when he desires the NATO member countries to increase the defense spending from 2% of the GDP up to 5%? Could that be a tactic in that particular direction also?
It could be that putting pressure on the Europeans. Yes, it could be that. Yes, and of course, just to show that he's so keen that he would like America to be bigger as well, not just great, bigger. And if it's bigger, it's stronger. So even he's broaching that idea of a huge area.
So what are the possibilities amid this particular pressure from the new US president? Do you think the Europeans have got the capacity to increase their defense spending from 2% of their GDP to 5%?
Well, some of them can, some of them have, and some would not be willing. For example, Canada is not willing. I think they just reached around not even 2%. So for many countries, it's not easy, and there are a lot of domestic pressures not to do it. So I don't think they would be under US pressure to do it, because of course we see Europeans as an entity, as a defense entity, as a security entity, as a political entity. So I don't think so. I'm sure they would be united in the face of US, you can say, pressure.
Right.
I'm sure they would be united.
Right. Ambassador Saleem, talking about that, enhancing the border security, when we talk about the largest deportation drives to be undertaken during this particular tenure, what are going to be the likely impacts, not only in terms of logistics, the challenges on the way ahead, also in terms of logistics, also in terms of the supply of the manpower?
Yeah, that's an important question. But before that, I have just a few comments on this Greenland
regarding
thing.
the strategic significance of Greenland.
Yeah. No, okay, the Canada thing, I think it was just in his way, in his own very peculiar way. He was trying to cut the Canadian leadership to size, you know. That was the endeavor. Panama Canal also was more of a threat. Okay, now Greenland is slightly more serious in the sense that because Trump, that is the only thing he mentioned in his first term as well, you know. There was this the whole thing about Greenland. Now, and interestingly enough, the people living in Greenland, it's just has a population of about 50,000. They have actually expressed interest in joining the US because for them it would be better to be Americans rather than. But still, I would say it would be a long shot, but at least he's basically what he's doing in that way is he's starting a debate, you know, a debate whereby, of course, he can pressurize the Europeans as well to a certain extent. But, you know, when you start the debate, then eventually, you know, something comes out of it. If not now, in the next few years, then in sort of, you know, longer down the road. So that is one thing. On this other thing, the immigration, I think what they're going to do, because there are several million people who actually, as per his sort of, you know, who are right now, who's illegally crossed the border just in the last few years. Now, he has said that he wants all of them to be deported, right? It may not be logistically possible. So what they're doing is, initially, the executive orders are just focusing on those who have some criminal record. I have no doubt that they will be deported. They've also said, and Trump and his sort of other kind of, you know, spokespersons have said that when they are going to make the arrest, if they find somebody else, you know, who doesn't have a criminal record, but is found to be illegally in the US, they will arrest them as well. So I think what I can envisage is you will see in the coming months, possibly like, you know, tens of thousands, or even if hundreds of thousands of arrests and sort of, you know, deportations. But that is still very small compared to the actual number. It's just less than 10% of the actual number, you know, perhaps even 5% of the actual number. But I think logistically it would not be possible for them to deport all of those 10 million people or more back to where they came from. So, you know, so they will probably end up deporting hundreds of thousands, and then there'll be such a sort of, you know, hue and cry within the US, and people will think, okay, that he's done enough, and then eventually he'll come out with some sort of a roadmap for the others, you know, some sort of mechanisms. That is what I envisage. But it is going to create a lot of ruckus in the US in the coming months.
So to what an extent that turbulence you are expecting out of this particular largest deportation drive in the US history?
I'm expecting a lot of turbulence. There's going to be a lot of chaos. Even I would say even in Congress, because any legislation or I'm sure there's going to be some reaction. And of course, they are representing Latinos also, a lot of like in the South and Southwest. I think it's going to be, at this time, the biggest challenge that Trump administration is going to face is this immigration issue, and of course, there are going to be legal challenges as well. It is going to be really big for Trump.
Writer Dr. NoumanSattar, American political analyst, thank you very much for joining us in the studio for this particular show. Really appreciate that. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, a former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, currently serving as President of the Institute of Regional Studies here in Islamabad. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.